In this presentation, we're looking at Australian and German principles, attitudes and support structures in relation to out-of-field teaching. My name's Linda Hobbs. I'm presenting with German colleague Raffaella Porsche, who isn't with us today. Research has shown that school leader practices can influence teachers' lived experiences of out-of-field teaching. Less is understood, however, about principals' attitudes towards out-of-field teaching, and then how these attitudes can influence the perceived support needs of teachers. So in this study, we're looking at principals from Germany and Australia and focusing explicitly on their attitudes and their school practices in relation to support for teachers who are out of field. The literature relating to attitudes towards out of field shows that teachers and principals can view out of field either positively, negatively, or both at the same time, or neutrally. So for example, the research from Porsche and Winnell, they did a literature review relating to student impact with some research showing that there can be a negative impact on teacher practice. Research by Sinker and Curran showed that there's high disapproval by teachers and principals towards the practice of assigning teachers out of field. And earlier research of mine showed that teachers actually in Australia saw that out of field teaching actually provides a learning opportunity for some teachers. Principals and teachers also view out of field quite differently depending on the subject, year level, the teachers and the actual context they're in. For example, Anna Duplessis' work shows that some subjects are more difficult to teach out of field. Other research shows that some of the subjects like maths and science are not very often, are preferably not taught out of field, although they are. That earlier research of mine talked about teachers who approach the out of field teaching as perceiving it as something they were just filling in, so just temporary. Others actually were trying to make the most of it and trying to do the best that they can by putting the time and effort into developing expertise. But for some other teachers, they're actually teaching out of field in an area that they wanted to pursue for their own interest. They also, principals and teachers can view out of field in a way that reflects their view on what makes a good teacher and also what's needed to teach effectively. So that's what we're specifically going to be looking at, is this idea of what makes a good teacher, what's needed to teach effectively, and how does that impact on the principal's attitudes towards out-of-field teaching. This is a pilot study, 2 research questions. What attitudes do Australian and German secondary principals possess towards teaching out of field? And what kind of support structures do schools provide for Australian and German secondary school teachers teaching out of field? The methods, it was a qualitative multiple case study according to Stake. This was conducted using data generated from projects in both countries. The project in particular was focusing on systemic conditions at the school, government and university level, and how those systemic conditions influence out-of-field teaching. What we're going to focus on in this paper is the interviews conducted with a small set of principals or vice principals from secondary schools in each country. The data collection and analysis involved cases which were selected to show the variety of regions, rural or regional, also across states in both Germany and Australia, and a variety in responses in each country. So the German cases were collected specifically for this project using an agreed set of interview questions that we developed together. Raffaella used qualitative content analysis. Her interviews included 5 school leaders from 5 schools. Included in this analysis is the ideas from 4 school leaders. The Australian cases used both existing interview data involving school leaders from a large study, also an interview done explicitly with the questions that Raffaella and I put together. The larger study, however, used similar types of questions, so that we regarded the interviews as comparable. We used a categorical and a thematic analysis. The larger study used 18 school leaders from 7 schools, and in this analysis here we're using 3 school leaders from 3 schools. The themes emerging from the from the analysis were, in the first instance, school leaders' attitudes towards out-of-field. That came up as something that was quite interesting in the data, and the second one was about the support. So those two research questions actually are emergent research questions after we looked at the data, and the categories in relation to the first theme enabled us to look at attitudes from 4 perspectives, from positioning of the subject matter, how they positioned it, how subjects are positioned, the consequences that were mentioned, and how the teacher as learner is positioned. The principal's views about support, there were 3 categories that emerged: in-school support structures, external support, and teachers' initiative and drive. In relation to the first theme, what I'm going to go through now are 4 types that emerged. Having done that category, looking across those 4 categories, we were able to identify 4 types of attitudes. So the first is teaching as pedagogical, and this view saw all teachers as being able to teach out of field regardless of their specialisation, as long as they have a strong foundation and they put the effort into preparing for lessons. So what we have are cases 1 to 4 are from Germany, and cases, so the G refers to Germany, and cases 5 to 7 are the Australian, so A case. So when looking at what teaching quality is from this attitude, it relates to teaching as being generic skills and knowledge. It's related to teachers' ability to use cross-disciplinary skills, such as handling a case in the this is a sort of handling a text in English, and relationships between teachers and students. It's a relationship game. The second attitude is teaching as passion. So a number of principals expressed the need for an interest in the subject, and that was determining how suitable a teacher was to teach out of field, but also in teaching generally, so that students can see the teacher as being passionate. And so quality teaching here refers to the interest and passion of the teacher, or having a soft spot for the subject, in a German case, and learning to teach a subject effectively when the teacher is motivated by their passions. Teaching as capability is a third attitude. All Australian cases mention teachers' capability as determining a teacher's suitability to teach a subject out of field, so how capable a teacher feels. And capability here referred to the teachers being committed and ability to learn, their general teaching ability, and their capability of teaching a subject, which is determined by their knowledge and their background in that subject. So here quality teaching refers to the importance of commitment to the knowledge of content and teaching it, but this can be acquired on the job. This is the critical component here. It can be acquired on the job and with experience over time, and so it's not necessarily during initial teacher education or your university training that you can get this background and develop this capability. The fourth one is teaching as being specialised, and this was particularly mentioned by one principal in Germany, and he was quite adamant that subject-specific knowledge is essential, and it's best that it's learned at university. And so this particular principal said that in accordance with that view, that professional development courses, they may give you qualifications in it, but it's not. But the university degree is actually preferred due to the depth of knowledge that's acquired through that intensive study. So quality teaching, according to this view, is that it's steeped in the strong subject matter knowledge, and it arises out of a history of engaging with the subject and the didactics and pedagogy that occur that are obtained through university training and a background in the discipline. So in terms of the principal's views about how to support the learning of out-of-field teachers, all school leaders were aware of both formal and informal structures available within and outside of their schools. There were a range of supports that were raised across the cases. The first was the notion of collegiate teams structured around subjects, and they were mentioned by both the German and Australian teachers, or as teaching teams or across year levels. The next is mentoring and coaching. This emerged with most Australian schools, but also one German school. The idea of having your mentors to support teachers. And the third is reflection on practice. And this was mentioned across Germany and Australia. So teachers reflecting on their practice through observation, but also organised structures to promote reflection, such as the quality teaching rounds that are used in New South Wales, and professional learning communities. Professional development was approached differently though across schools. Case 4 even mentioned that teachers would do a certificate course for a subject they're not even teaching. In Australia, professional development was either restricted to school goals, or so that teachers were actually could only undertake professional development that related to the general school goals rather than attending to their own needs, or was unrestricted at the request of the teacher, within reason. External support other than formal professional development and certificate courses was only mentioned by Australian principals. So that's referring to teachers getting support from other teachers at other schools, or other forms of using other networks. So it's interesting when you look at the relationship between the leaders' views of teaching and the focus of support and the support that can be provided for out-of-field teachers. So when considering that teaching is teaching as pedagogical, then the focus of support there would be around developing a generic teaching skills. The types of supports that you might see include whole school PD days and professional learning structures, the notion of teachers reflecting on their practice and providing collegial support generally. If teaching is perceived if quality teaching is about passion, then extending the passion for teaching would be the focus of support. The types of support you would see: collegial support from in-field colleagues, undertaking formal certification or PD to promote interest in the subject, support from external networks. Additional time is important, perhaps across all of them, but in order to become passionate about something, you have to really immerse yourself in it, and that does take time. Observing lessons across subject areas can also help to pick up on in-field teachers' passions. Capability: if teaching is about capability, then the focus of support should be about enhancing and extending that capability. So the types of support structures you might see: support from external networks, undertaking formal certification or PD, collegial support generally from in-field colleagues, and again observing other teachers. If you see teaching as specialised, then building that subject-specific teaching skills is central. So undertaking those certification courses and collegial support from in-field colleagues as well are really important. So most leaders viewed that the teacher has the capacity to learn and needs to take some responsibility for the learning, but should also be supported to do so. There was variation in leader attitudes. The analysis showed that there was variation in principals' attitudes in relation to the importance of teachers' subject background knowledge, the relative importance of the subject in question, the possible consequences that might arise, and how teachers were positioned as learners. Suitability relates to teacher characteristics, so principals referred to in-school and external supports, but teachers' initiative and drive was seen to be an important mediating factor to suitability of a teacher to teach out of field. The positioning of the content by leaders was also important. The positioning of content knowledge in relation to other teacher characteristics influences the type of support provided or promoted within the school. Also, teacher willingness to participate in professional learning was important. So some conclusions. This tolerance for a practice that runs counter to a system's standards for teaching arises out of necessity, pragmatic leadership, and a history of schools just making do with the resources they have. Unique to this study are 4 broad attitudes relating to the nature of teaching and teaching as pedagogical, passion, capability, and being specialised. Each indicated different perceptions about the focus of the support needs of out-of-field teachers, and then how such support might be provided. Given that attitudes can determine behaviour and decision making, this research helps to understand why leadership responses to out-of-field teaching can vary across schools, actually. There's no doubt that teachers need to be learners in this context, and so there needs to be support to enable this. Thank you.